All righty. Well, it is the top of the hour. As usual, I'd like to say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world and where you're joining us from. I'm excited to bring to you guys another one of our technical series. This really is a good one. In fact, we did one of these about a month ago regarding SNMP and how simple network management protocol gets utilized within Domotz, and it was quite popular. In fact, it was popular enough that we wanted to create an extension to this and do one that's a little bit more advanced and very specific to Domotz and how we set things up. Let's go over a couple housekeeping items before we get into the presentation. With all of our webinars, we want you to feel like you can ask questions. Please leverage the GoToWebinar panel that started when you went into this webinar. There's a question section. Feel free to type those questions there. We will, if pertinent, we'll get to them during the presentation. Otherwise, we'll wait till the end with the Q&A section that we have at the end. Of course, if you have technical related questions regarding Domotz, maybe regarding some of the content that is a little bit larger or broader topic than what we're covering, feel free to shoot us an email at support@domotz.com. If you happen to have business related questions, you always can reach out to us as well at sales@domotz.com. That being said, let me do a little bit of an introduction. My name is JB Fowler, Chief Product Officer here at Domotz. I work very closely with Giancarlo Finelli, our CTO. Giancarlo is going to be joining us in the latter half of the presentation due to some conflicts that he has. But what I'm mostly excited about is having Alessandro Lulli here, one of our senior engineers that's been with Domotz for a couple of years now, really expanding on this topic. Alessandro, do you want to say hello?
Hello to everybody. Yes, thank you.
Perfect. So Alessandro has some really good discussion points, going to give some examples about what we're doing today, and it's going to be very fruitful for you. So I'm excited to do that. Let's talk about what we're going to address today. I do want to point out, I'll just kind of read at the bottom of the screen, this is a fairly technical webinar. There's a lot of details in this. We don't expect you to take notes, jot things down. This session is being recorded, so you'll get to leverage that. We're also going to send out the presentation to you directly, so Violet, our social media manager, will follow up with that. And then I'd also point out that we have some URLs. In fact, throughout this presentation, we have multiple URLs that point to the different resources and references that we're using through this presentation. So keep that in mind. I do, of course, want you to pay as much attention as possible, but in the end, we're going to be sending this out to you, and if there's something you want to go back and look over, you'll be able to do that. Like we did before, we're going to talk about why SNMP is valuable. We're also going to look at APIs. We talk a lot about APIs and the Domotz APIs and how we leverage that. There's key benefits to doing that, not only from SNMP being able to interrogate the devices on the network, but also then using the Domotz APIs to extract that information into the applications that you need. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll recap and do an intro again of these APIs and how to configure SNMP. We'll look at the benefits of webhooks and how those get utilized. In fact, there's even a new webhook out there that I think you'll find interesting, especially as it relates to SNMP in this particular topic. Alessandro is then going to talk about, SNMP configuration, putting these configurations into workflows that make sense. We've talked in the past about NodeRED and how you can utilize our APIs inside that application. And I think that this will be a good recap of that. Again, if you're not familiar with that, if you haven't joined us before, you'll see a link that references some of those historical webinars and help pages and blog posts. Of course, we're going to be doing a live demo of all this. At the end, Giancarlo is going to come in and talk a little bit about the future evolution of how we see SNMP going within Domotz. It's funny when we we talked internally about the word future and the word evolution. The reality is we're all already implementing some of this structure. In fact, Alessandro is going to be showing some things that will be implemented really nicely into the Domotz dashboard in the very, very near future, making your job as a service provider or an integrator who wants to use SNMP that much easier. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have a question and answer section at the end. I always like to cover this. We'll make this as brief as possible. It's some of the stuff we've talked about, but simple network management protocol really is quite useful. It's been around for decades now, really since networking and TCP IP monitoring have started. SNMP has been around. I will say it's a way that manufacturers can present data within their equipment in a very easy to use manner. At least that is the intent. The nice thing about it is it's a very common shared structure. It is a way in which if you are looking at, just throw out an example, if you're looking at hard disk drives, if we want to see the status and storage limits, levels, or the current temperature or the utilization of CPU and memory inside devices, it's a great way for you to monitor those type of details. And for the most part, there are what they call MIBs that are common amongst devices that you can reference so that you can get this data. Of course, a lot of times, and we've talked about this in previous webinars, there's private MIBs as well that are very specific to the devices. But in the end, if you understand these libraries of data that are available within these devices, being able to monitor and manage the end equipments that are on your network are just that much easier with SNMP. Of course, you can do things like predictive alerting and customized monitoring as well, depending on what your situation is or what it is you want to do with your clients and customers. The last webinar we did about a month ago, which was sponsored by MSP Geek, is out on YouTube. And again, I don't expect you to copy that URL down. We'll send that to you in this presentation at the end. APIs. So why are APIs so powerful? Well, these are application programming interfaces. This is where you can implement things like customized reporting. You can take data that's being collected by Domotz or through the SNMP sensors that you've set up, and you really can create personalized dashboards. Some of what you're going to see today when it comes to NodeRED and how we implement some of those is just one way in which you can grab some of the data through the Domotz APIs, these publicly available APIs. We have some customers that are actually building their own solutions that they make available, their own dashboards that they make available to their customers and clients. And that's what we really mean by new market solutions that are available. And then the last, the kind of call it marketing simplistic slide that I want to talk about has to do with automation, right? If any of you have looked at SNMP, right, simple network management protocol, a lot of times when you look at it for the first time, it's anything but simple. What we're trying to do is really put that simple back into this SNMP with some of the things that we're doing. When it comes to sensors and SNMP, there's a lot of things that you can do in conjunction with the Domotz APIs that allows you to do automation and automated events. And some of the things that Alessandro is going to talk about today, you're going to see how you can actually template, how you can replicate sites, how you can install sensors automatically based off of the usage of webhooks, the APIs, and the SNMP MIBs and OIDs themselves. So I'm pretty excited about that. In the end, and you guys have heard me say this before, Domotz fundamentally is about helping you be more efficient in how you run your business, how you do your operations within your business, but it's also about making sure that you understand what's going on in your customer sites, helping them know that there are problems before they call you, right? It's about that proactive monitoring. And the information that we're talking about today is one of the key ways in which you can really expand on those two value propositions. So that being said, I would normally turn this over to Giancarlo, but because he had a conflict at this time, I wanted to take over for a little bit. Giancarlo will probably join us soon, and when he does, I invite him to chime in. But the one thing that I want to say, and this is information we've talked about before, the Domotz public APIs are available on our website. You go to portal.domotz.com/developers, and this is where you can see all of the different APIs that are out there. Fundamentally, I will tell you that our web application, our mobile application, our desktop applications are all built on top of these types of APIs. And so you can extract a lot of information if you want to create your own customized dashboard or reports for that. When it comes to generating API keys, and I'm not sure, maybe Alessandro will show some of this in his demonstration, but how you set it up can go an API key. You can go into your portal, you can go under settings and API keys, and you can create one or more different API keys at your level, right, at your permission level there. Of course, we've shown how you can test and validate some of the APIs by going to Postman and playing with those things. You'll see how they get used, the type of information that is returned from that. So all that is there. And then, of course, if you want to edit the API keys that you have the ability to do that as well out there. So a lot of information within this. Alessandro is going to be showing some of these key things when it comes to the public APIs. Now, one of the things with respect to APIs, of course, are webhooks. Webhooks are really about getting push notifications out across the cloud when an event occurs at the Domotz site. So when you have a set event that happens, right, we can essentially push this notification. It is async, right, or asynchronous to the system that you care about, whether that is another cloud-based system, whether it is another device on the network that's listening to a particular port or that event. You can use that. Really, really useful when it comes to automation. It's also a way to optimize so that you're not continuously polling APIs for information. It's just a great way that if nothing happens, there's no reason to push data, there's no reason to utilize CPU. So webhooks are really powerful when it comes to that. One of the things that I have here in bold is the fact that we do have a new event. Essentially, when a new MIB is applied to our database, when something changes inside our database, you can actually get an event on that. And Alessandro is going to talk to you today about why that is so powerful and what it can do for you when it comes to automation. And I think we'll go through a couple examples of this as well. I mentioned at the beginning that we have a lot of URLs and a lot of references. This page fundamentally shows some of the things that we've done, not only on our website, but also through videos that we've posted on YouTube. So I'm not going to, go over this word by word, but you can use this as a reference when you want to try some things out. Again, I want to point out that as you guys are trying things, we want you to experiment. We want you to learn. You always can reach out to support@domotz.com, and we're happy to help you with any technical questions that you may have regarding, public APIs, regarding webhooks, regarding anything that we're about to show you in this. That being said, Alessandro, I want to give the presentation over to you, my friend. So let me transition this over to presenter, over to you.
Okay.
And then you, sir, are free to go. So, by the way, Alessandro, is there anything that I said that I needed to correct on? Because normally Giancarlo would add that technical stuff. Was it okay?
It's okay, yeah.
Good.
Okay. I can start again my presentation. Yeah, so good morning again. And okay, you should see my presentation now. Okay, yes. So the idea here is to help you transitioning from a manual SNMP monitoring to automatic SNMP monitoring. The idea is that you have many networks to monitor, and new devices are added to your network. And every time new devices are added to your network, sometimes you need to monitor that device with SNMP, and you need to manually add this sensor. And the idea in this presentation is to suggest you a methodology that you can apply to automatically add this SNMP sensor. And as said by JB, also you find the details of all this presentation in our blog in the Domotz website. So to present you this mechanism, I choose as the running problem of this presentation the monitoring of ink levels. But the very same approach can be easily applied in all the scenarios ranging from disk utilization, CPU, monitoring of temperature. Every time you have to monitor something with SNMP, you can follow the very same approach. And the main step that to build this mechanism is to create a Domotz template from one of our existing printer where we already set up all the SNMP sensor that we want to monitor on a printer, and use this template every time a new printer appear in our network to automatically add the very same sensor and trigger from loaded from the template. And this will be due every time a notification of MIB discovery is received by your mechanism. So the recipe to build this mechanism is Domotz, then NodeRED, like said by GB, but you can implement this mechanism with other tools also, but also implementing in your preferred programming language. And because the idea is that you need something able to receive the webhook and then make some processing and call the Domotz public API to add the sensor and the trigger. And of course, a new printer that appear in your network. And the directions to build this mechanism is the printer MIB, because the idea is to be notified every time a MIB, a new device supporting a MIB appears in our network, and in particular is supporting the printer MIB. That is a MIB that describe the properties of the printer, from the level of the ink and the colorant value, but many other information about the printer. Next, we have the template containing the sensor and triggers that we want to add to all our printer. And after we receive the notification, we start creating the sensor and the triggers to the new devices. So the first ingredient is the Domotz public API. Here I have a screenshot, but I can dive in the documentation. So here we have the documentation of the Domotz public API that provides you a lot of useful function, ranging from information about your agents, metrics like the uptime, the status history of your agent, or information about the devices. And in this presentation, we are covering this section that regards the SNMP sensor. So the create SNMP, this is the endpoint that you should call to create a new SNMP sensor on this specific device, on that specific agent identificator. And as soon as you create a new SNMP sensor, you can add to it new triggers. So this is the other function that we are going to cover. Also, we talked previously about the webhooks, and the webhooks are sent as a post notification. And here in the very same documentation, you found all the events that you can receive with the webhooks. And in this case, we are going to receive the event that is called agent feature discovery. And so we are going to handle something like that. So every time we Domotz discover that appeared a new device supporting some MIB in your network, it notifies you about the specific device and in which agent is being discovered, the new MIB, and the list of all the MIBs that are supported by the device. Okay. We can return to our presentation, and the second ingredient of our our demo is NodeRED. NodeRED is a tool that permits you to do flow-based programming. So the idea is that you have a lot of nodes in your flow. Each node takes some input from the previous node, makes some processing, and pass the result as output to the subsequent node. In a previous webinar, we presented also the plugin that we build for NodeRED. It's a plugin that permits you to have a Domotz node inside NodeRED that help you to easily call the Domotz public API. And you can find the details and how to install the plugin at this link. Sorry. And another ingredient is an existing printer. So the existing printer is important because it's the printer from where we build the template that will be used to all our printers that appear in the network. So I take the old printer, the real old printer, and I will show you inside Domotz this printer. I directly jump to that device, and we can see that this printer already have some SNMP sensor already configured. In particular, we are interested in monitoring the ink level, and we subscribed to this 4 OED of this for this device, and you can find also the historical data for each of the OED that you subscribe on. In this case, I just added this sensor a few hours ago and nobody used the printer today. So the value is equals, but here you can find the historical value of the historical data of this particular OED. We are interested, and if you want to add additional sensor, you can use this view where is presented all the MIB that this Domotz discovered supported by this device. So for instance, we found that the printer MIB is supported by this printer, but also other MIB like the host resource MIB and many others. And here you find the documentation of all the OED supported by this MIB. And for instance, we want to add additional sensor to our device. For instance, we just monitor the ink level, but we want also the value of the colorant in our printer, and these values are loaded on the fly from your device. So we found that there is 4 levels of ink, the black, cyan, magenta, and yellow, and we can add also the monitoring of this sensor. So as soon as you add new sensor, you found here that also the 4 other OEDs are now monitored on this device. So we have 8 sensors on this printer, manually added, and I previously set also 4 triggers on this sensor because I want to be alerted every time the ink level falls down the 15%. So I add 4 trigger on the SNMP sensor in order to be alerted in case of the ink falling down. Okay, so this is the old printer, and we can export the configuration of this printer, and exporting it, we obtain a JSON file that I'm opening and showing to you. Is a JSON file that contains the configuration of this printer, and in particular, we are interested in this section where is contained the sensors and the triggers of this device. So we found here that are written all the sensors and the triggers that is now configured on that device. Okay. Next, we have an old printer. We exported the settings and the properties of this old printer. Now is the time to have a new printer in our network. and I navigate on the new printer now. So in this printer, imagine that this is new now, and this has nothing because we have not started monitoring anything on this device. And we want to automatically add the sensor and the triggers, the very same sensor and trigger added to the old printer to this new printer. And the idea is to build two NodeRED flow. So I split the computation into phases. In the first one, we load the template that we downloaded now from Domotz in order to have the template loaded in NodeRED and able to be used in the other flow. And in the second flow, we create an HTTP receiver that listens of Domotz notification, and every time Domotz notify in the webhook, it will trigger the computation of this flow that in case the printer MIB is supported in the device for which we are receiving the notification, we are loading the template, and for each sensor included in the template, we create the SNMP sensor in Domotz. Also, for each trigger included in the template, then we create the trigger in Domotz. So let's start diving now in NodeRED, and we build our first flow. I have here an empty NodeRED dashboard, and NodeRED provide to you many functionality built in. And for instance, now we need to load the downloaded file. And in this case, it is helping us the file in Node that permit to load a specific file in NodeRED. I'm writing here the file name of the downloaded file, and I give a name to that node. And I have my first node in the NodeRED. Now we know that the template is in JSON format, so we need to convert it in JSON. And next we need to, that's it. So it's loaded and converted, and we can add at the end a debug node that basically is just printing here on the right what is going on. And I put just in front of everything, in this case, an inject node that is a button to trigger the computation of that flow. Just move it. If I deploy now and trigger the computation, I see that something has flowed inside, and at the end is arriving something like that. That is the template that we previously see, the JSON, that is included the 8 OED sensor, and here you have the details of all the OED sensor. Now we need to store this template in NodeRED so we can use it in the subsequent flow. And to store this template, we make use of a function node, and we make use of the concept of context. NodeRED as the concept of context is a way to share the information between the nodes. In a function node, you have to write JavaScript code, and is one of the more general node that you can have in NodeRED is just taking the input and giving the input in the message variable, and in the return statement you provide what you want to propagate to the subsequent node. So in this case, the basic function node is just taking the input and giving the same input as output. And the only things that I want to add here is the storing of the payload data. So all these value inside here, inside the template of of the flow context. So if I connect everything now and deploy again my flow, if I execute again, now the output is the very same, but the context is now populated. I clean everything and we can move on the subsequent flow. So here the idea is to start building our HTTP receiver, and to this end in NodeRED is present the HTTP in node, that is an HTTP server that receives notification, and I want to receive a post request because Domotz is sending the webhooks as post request, and the endpoint that where I want to receive this request, for instance, is the webinar endpoint, and I can create the HTTP receiver, and next I can make an HTTP response, because every time we receive a request, we want to answer that we received the request, and also a debug node again to check what is arriving in this notification. Okay, now is the time to wire everything and to wire also in Domotz the webhook. So if you navigate to the shared alert and ticketing system section in Domotz, here you can find many contact channels that you can attach and where you can receive notification. And in particular, today we are interested in the webhooks. So a way to receive a notification as a webhook, and I'm going to add a new webhook receiver that is the NodeRED receiver, and I'm putting webinar as the endpoint. I call it webinar, and so I have the webinar receiver now. I need to attach this webhook to a shared alert. So I create my first shared alert here, and I call it again webinar, and I select that every time an alert is triggered in this shared alert, this is the contact channel that must be notified, so the webhook, and I subscribe to the feature discovery event only. So in this shared alert, you are going to receive just notification about the feature discovery event, and in particular the NIP discovery event. I enable it and I create it. So now we have the shared alert configured, is sending data to the webinar endpoint, that is the very same endpoint that we have here. And now I'm going to simulate the event just to let you show you what is arriving. Okay, maybe I put a wrong endpoint because I saved it previously. I have to change it, sorry. So I do again the step of before. I changed just the address, that a mistake, and I add again this, enabling it. Okay, I can return to NodeRED, and okay. I call it webinar is post, and okay, like in the old demo, I have some problem now, but we can continue, and I wonder how to do it now. So we can continue building our flow, and the idea is we must now check if the received notification support the printer MIB. Okay. This is a switch is just a condition to check what is received in the payload, so we can check the contains that we want that our notification contains the printer MIB. Okay, and we can check the value that is inside this. Okay, someone is suggesting me that maybe yes, I checked the feature discovery. Okay, I missed one part here because I created a new shared alert, but I have to attach it to the agent. So if I navigate to the agent, to the alert setting, I need to attach the shared alert to the agent. Okay, so now everything should be fine. I'm just adding this switch node and deploy again. And if I simulate, okay, now it's working. Sorry for the problem. So this is the event that you are going to receive. So it's a feature discovery event, and it's telling you the notification that this particular agent and this particular device, Domotz discovered a new MIB on that device, that is the printer MIB and the if MIB. So this device ID is the very same device of our new printer. So we can navigate again to the new printer, and the device ending in 39 is the one for which we are receiving the notification. So the new printer for which we have not SNMP sensor currently. Okay, so let's return again to our flow, and what we want to check is that the printer MIB is supported by the device for which we are receiving the notification. So I'm just wiring these two pieces where we check that the array contains the printer MIB. I wrongly write it, so printer MIB. And also I need to check that the value is included in the payload data value data MIB array. So I'm just changing the path where the property is checked. Okay. Once we identify that the notification supports the printer MIB, we can continue the computation. And the idea is to load the template that we previously saved. And to do this, again, we can make use of the function node that is executed after the switch. And in the function node, we can build the payload to be used in the subsequent node as this. So in the payload, we are going to load the template that we previously saved, and we are interested just in the OED sensor. And then we continue propagating the agent ID and the device ID that we have received in our notification, because this is the device where we want to add the sensor. Okay, I give a name to this just to recognize. Okay. And we can check what is happening until here. I'm cleaning everything, deploy, and sending the notification again. And here we can see what is arriving at the end of this current flow. So we have an array containing 8 objects that are the 8 sensors that we previously saved. So we can continue the computation. Now we don't want a message containing 8 elements, but we want 8 messages because we want to create 8 sensors. And to split the message, we have the split node. So the split node, is helping us to split everything. And if I deploy again, now, instead of having one message containing 8 elements, okay, I simulate again. Okay, I have 8 messages, 1 for each sensor. So these are the very same sensor that we have in our template. Now it's time to create the SNMP sensor on our new device. So for now, we have received a notification, checked that the printer may be supported, loaded the previous sensor, and now we need to create the sensor. To prepare the sensor, we can, before check in the documentation what is required by Domotz to create a new SNMP sensor. So we need to call this endpoint, provide the agent ID and the device ID where we want to create the sensor, and provide this body that is defining the OID that we want to monitor. So to prepare the payload for Domotz, we take again the function node wire everything, and here we prepare the payload. I'm just copying the one that I have. So the body is the very same body that we have in our documentation, and the agent ID and the device ID are the one that we have received from the notification. I'm just adding the sensor because I want to propagate the sensor that contains also the trigger that we will add subsequently. So this is the function that builds the payload for the Domotz public API. I call it sensor. And now we can call the Domotz API to just make more space. So we provided a plugin called the Domotz API. Here you find the node that permits you to call the Domotz public API. And the idea is just you have just to configure it, giving the API key and the endpoint where you want to perform the Domotz call. I already have configured this. I give this a name that is create sensor. So this is the node that actually created the ISNMP. And I select, these are all the functions, the Domotz public API that you can call. And I selected the SNMP sensor create, and I'm telling to this node to use the input body as the input parameters. So I'm not triggering now, I want to continue. The idea now, here you have loaded the sensor, created one message for each sensor, and created the sensor on Domotz. Now we have basically to do the very same things for the trigger because the steps are the very same. So after we created the sensor in Domotz, we can make another function node that, similarly to the get sensor, is loading the triggers from the template and just copying it and modifying it. So this is the function node that will load the trigger for us and is building the body similarly to previous. The only things that is different is now we have to extract the new sensor ID, because if we check the Domotz public API documentation, the create SNMP trigger function requires also to specify a sensor ID, and this is returned by the Domotz public API call after when we create the sensor. So here is just sugar to extract the sensor ID from the message that we received from Domotz. I call it this get trigger. Now I'm going a little bit fast, but you can find these steps on the blog. And the idea here is just to check again, to make another condition to understand if trigger exists, because in our old printer we have 8 sensors, but just 4 of them have the triggers. So we put another condition in order to understand if this sensor has trigger, and here we need to check that the message payload that I just copied, the one of before, is not empty. So we have triggers to create. If we have trigger to create, we have to split again, because maybe we need to create more than one trigger. And finally, create the body that we want to send to Domotz. And this is the very same that you found in our documentation. So this is the body that requires the function. We have additional API call that I'm not covering now, but to understand what is the function ID, you can find which are the function that you can call on the function that you can call on a specific sensor. And these are all the, I'm just finding the old printer to show you all the possible functions that you can exploit in a trigger. So if we check the old printer, when creating a new trigger, you have to select which are the trigger functions. So for instance, I want to be notified when the value is equal to, is greater than something. So this is what is the function ID. I'm going back to NodeRED. Okay, so here we need to create the payload for the trigger. I put in the wrong place. So this is very similar to the previous. We provide the agent ID, the device ID, the sensor ID, and the body that is the very same body that you have in the documentation. And finally, we can call again the Domotz public API, selecting instead of the create SNMP sensor, the create SNMP trigger function. Now I wire it again, and I wire everything. I deploy. I'm opening here to see the debug. And if I trigger everything, I found that in the end, I received 4 messages because we have 4 triggers. So in the end, we received the response of the 4 trigger creation. And I navigate again to the new printer. And in the new printer, if I load the Domotz, now we should have all the sensor and trigger that we previously have also on the other device. So we found that in the new printer, that is the HP printer, we have the very same sensor that we have also in the old printer, and this very same trigger that we have also in the other printer. So here, the idea is that with this process, now we have just to wait to be notified by Domotz of discovery of new MIB, and every time a new MIB is discovered, if the printer MIB is supported, this flow is automatically adding all the sensor and triggers to our new devices. Okay, I completed that part of the demo. I can give the words again to JB.
Yeah, Alessandro, I love it. I love it. There's no doubt, and we got several questions that came in, and I want to reiterate a couple things, right? This is a rather technical webinar. I mean, not only are you taking advantage of simple network management protocol, so SNMP, and how we deal with that and how we deal with MIBs from a Domotz perspective, but then you're also including the APIs, right? Those application programming interfaces that we make available, and bringing the two of those things together to help automate the workflows that you have. So the idea behind this and what you've shown I'm not going to lie, right? From a university perspective, this is kind of like a 401 level type of class, but it's really, really useful in helping you, really bring efficiency into your organization. The idea behind this is if you have a client that, to the example that you showed here, Alessandro, right? If your client goes and buys their printer at Office Depot and plugs it into your network, how can you automatically be notified? How can the appropriate SNMP sensors for toner levels or whatever it may be in that particular device automatically be implemented into the system, right, into the Domotz agent, so that you can be notified not only of the new device, but also of the status of that device. This is all really good stuff. It's ways in which you can automate these things. Giancarlo, I believe that you're online now, and I think you should probably take the presentation if you want, or I can do it, to talk about how we're going to take some of what Alessandro has shown here and then bring it into the Domotz application. Giancarlo, are you there?
Thanks, JP. I'm here. Just a second, I will share my screen and you will see probably the rest of the presentation. So yeah, we will definitely move on and we will show what's next that we are building or cooking in Domotz. Now, whatever Alessandro has shown is really technical. It's more like a workshop of how to train people how to integrate Domotz with other tools. In this case, NodeRED, where we have a proper integration and integration with NodeRED, and makes NodeRED a viable solution to use the Domotz API easily. And in this case, the use case was, okay, I have a template created, a template for monitoring SNMP created in my workspace, but I want Domotz to automatically apply that template to my new devices. And this is exactly what we are building in Domotz. So what Alessandro showed is the proof of concept of the viable solution that we are cooking in Domotz. So in Domotz, there is already a concept of templates, not only for SNMP, but in general for devices. And I will show you at the end of the presentation, because there was a question about this, how we manage template. But basically, it's a template in Domotz is a JSON file which describes how you treat the device inside Domotz. And what Alessandro showed is that as soon as we discover that the new device joining the network or a device joining the network supports new MIPS, you will have a way to automatically attach those the monitor of SNMP to that device. This is a way to do it through NodeRED. What Domotz is doing is a way to automatic doing this through Domotz itself without the use of NodeRED. It's a long path, I have to admit, but very soon you will see a new way of monitoring SNMP through Domotz. Domotz will automatically propose or suggest what you want to add to monitor to your device, and soon after it will also suggest if you want to automatically do that as soon as the new devices come back online or come online or discovered by Domotz and so on. Now, it's not only that, we are also moving forward. The representation of the data through SNMP, it's definitely not the best as is today in our UI. You have a list of OIDs, and for every single OID, you have the values discovered. But specifically to the example that Alessandro was showing, now he was talking about the ink level in a printer. Ink level is represented in SNMP through multiple OID. One of the OID is the total level of the ink for that specific cartridge. Another OID is the current level, and another OID is the name of that cartridge. So if you look at these three OIDs separately, it does make a lot of human readable sense, no? So what Domotz is building is a template that automatically associates these three values together, and it will show you the CN level is of that specific printer as 60% still there, because it's a combination of three different OIDs. And we will do the same for UPS, we will do the same for switches, we will do the same for other things that makes a lot of sense when monitored through SNMP. And again, this combined to the automatic template makes a lot of powerful, makes this tool very, very powerful for the future. Now, the last thing I want to add, and this brings me again to another question that I want to cover. Okay, let me cover that question. So somebody asked, I can't remember probably the name. Yes, Alex asked if there is a way to easily monitor the resource usage of Windows machine. He was specifically referring to SNMP. And now the reality is that SNMP is definitely not the default tool on Windows. You need to enable, you need to fine tune and so on. So technically speaking, it is feasible to monitor CPU, memory usage, volume occupancy on all the drives on the Windows PC, but it's definitely not an easy one. Now, what Domotz is working on is two things. The first thing is represented in this slide is a custom driver. So Domotz will soon make available a proper programming language where you can teach or tell Domotz how to interface with your own devices or servers or services running your network. So Domotz, in the same way we develop drivers to interface with PDUs or with PoE switches, we will allow you to write that code. So you have your specific way of, for instance, querying a database and return the data through Domotz in the Domotz UI, and then use that data for putting alerts and so on. That's very powerful. And of course, by doing that, you can integrate your Windows PC for retrieving the CPU usage or memory usage. But one thing that I didn't show in this slide, sorry for that, but it's something that we are also working on, is a better way to retrieve information directly from Windows without writing any code. And this is by leveraging some common protocol available on Windows rather than SNMP. That brings me to the end of the presentation with the question and answer session. I'm sure,
Giancarlo, while you're looking through some of the questions, I do want to point out a few things about what you showed in these last 3 bullets on how we're evolving. I think a lot of our listeners, as I mentioned earlier, recognize that while the word S is meant to be simple in simple network management protocol, it's actually quite complex. And especially as you start to take advantage of scripting and using APIs and everything that Alessandro showed you, it works, right? It's a way to, proactively monitor, proactively react to changes in the network. We've showed in the past how you can generate reports, but ultimately what you are showing, right, and where Domotz is going is how we can eliminate all of that for you and make it easier to use Domotz, because fundamentally, Domotz is about simplicity. It's about helping you be more efficient. And if we can eliminate a lot of that scripting for you and do that inside our UI, if we can automatically build in SNMP templates, if we can show you tables, show you data in a dashboard that makes sense to you around the devices you care about, we want to do that. And it's about making it easy. One thing that I love about the third bullet, right, custom driver and programming, it may sound a little bit complex, but ultimately, that to me is about taking advantage of the fact that manufacturers are moving away from SNMP and more towards APIs, whether they're cloud-based APIs or they're device-based APIs, right? We're giving you the ability to take custom systems and develop your own drivers easily, while we then modify that into our application and make it even more simple in the future. So I'm super, super excited about where we're going. That being said, I think we do have a couple questions. I want to point out that we're right at the top of the hour. What have you got for us, Giancarlo?
So the only question I want to cover, but I'm sure there has been multiple ones that my colleagues has answered. So a couple of people actually asked, how can today leverage the Domotz templates? Now, the templates that Alessandro was showing, and I want to show a very quick way of leveraging that. Let me share this other view, sorry. It's my Chrome. I don't find my Chrome. Okay. Okay. So you probably see my Domotz app now.
Yes.
So when you go in manage, you know you can search for all the device by brand or by name or whatever. And I have searched for all my Cisco. I have, of course, some voice over IP, but also Cisco Meraki and also my Cisco switch. I know that in this case, I have configured for this Cisco switch some, let's say, custom OID. I retrieved those from the list here, as I've done for multiple times, no? But I've configured for all of them. I want to retrieve the description, all the status, operational status of all the ports, and then the temperature, the internal temperature. This is a long work, as we have said multiple times. No, it requires a lot of manual work. But once I do for one device, I can export this configuration. It saves me a JSON file basically on my computer, and then I can multi-select all my other Cisco. Now, I'm applied the same configuration also to the Meraki or the voice over IP, where it doesn't make sense, but I just want to show you the potentiality there. And then I import back the file that I just saved. So it will open a pop-up. I want to import my file. It will ask me if I want to import everything, and I say, okay, I want to import just the sensor that I've created on that other device. Okay, let me unplug everything else, otherwise it will overwrite. And I will also import the triggers that I configured there. And this is already available in Domotz, so you can already leverage this. You configure one device with all the monitoring that you want, and then you apply that same template, basically a SNMP template, to all the other devices. And that's everything from my side, JB.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Giancarlo. A lot of questions came through. As we always do, we'll get back to you via email. I do want to remind everybody that this has been recorded. Again, I recognize the fact that it's technical and we've got a lot of questions about references and examples. We will be sending that out to you. You likely will receive a consolidated email tomorrow with locations of this video, references to past videos, as well as the presentation itself. So I want to thank you for attending. If you do have more questions, feel free to email us at support@domotz.com. If you have business related questions, you can always reach out to sales@domotz.com. Thank you very much for attending. As always, we appreciate your time, and I hope you have a great morning, great afternoon, great evening, depending on where you are. Thank you.